The only thing that would make a two-dimensional artwork better is a third dimension. That's what we're gonna do in this video. Now, I'm no stranger to 3D art. I've 3D-ified various 2D artworks by doing sort of layered painting in resin pours, also layered paper illustrations in acrylic sheets. And a similar idea with this Treasure Planet piece where I also used the opacity of the acrylic sheets to draw on directly with alcohol markers. Now, while the effect of those is genuinely really cool, I'm also aware that not everyone at home who wants to experience that effect for themselves has copious amounts of expensive UV resin or a laser cutter that can cut acrylic sheets up with. So in this video, I'm gonna do some 3D artwork that you can do. And I haven't tried this before, but I have a feeling it's gonna work really well. Speaking of working really well, I have to open up with a massive thank you. The Kickstarter was officially funded. We hit our funding goal. I will be using the color quest in this video, so I don't need to blab off about a whole bunch of its awesome features, but you can go learn more by clicking the link in the description to go to the color quest. And I just wanted to start off with a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the Kickstarter. I'm so excited to get this in people's hands. And if we reach our first stretch goals, I'll be able to get even more into your hands. Because if you unlock me making an alcohol marker masterclass, that will be an extra $30 US of value that everyone who backs the bundle tier will get for free. Go check it out, links in the description. Thank you so much to everyone who's backed it. I can't wait for you to get your color quest. So, my quest for today is to 3D-ify some of these pieces. Now, there are 50 illustrations in the landscape and portrait color quest, so 100 in total. And the later ones are a bit more advanced with more layers, more figures, and environments. So I've picked one that I think has a cool sequence of like background, midground, foreground that I can use to bring that 3D effect to life and see if my theory is gonna turn out as compelling as I think it might. Now I'm starting in my piece right in the middle, the big monster man, because at the end of the day, he is the core point of focus, and I want him to also be the core subject of the lighting. So I start off by working towards a nice burgundy fur color, but as I've sort of established that and a bit of the shading, I start to work in purples and then blues to not only build up the darkness, but to add layers of darker, cool tones, which will help the environment feel more like a night environment, even though we'll have this golden glow from behind. The nice thing about alcohol markers is you can push them pretty far, but they won't saturate beyond their actual limit, even when you combine them. So even though I'm mixing red, purples, and blues in multiple layers, they don't keep adding opacity until they're just like black. What actually ends up happening is the last layer I've done the most saturation with ends up holding more of the tone. That's how I use the blues, reds, and purples, not only to mix and blend to create a smoother and textured fur effect, but also to make sure that in general we have this sort of blue tone in the deepest areas of shadow to make it feel like nighttime. I usually save this golden highlight step to the very last just because it just feels so finishing touchy to see that colored rim light get added and make it feel immediately complete. Now, our unfortunate wanderer who has come across this, I believe, Oni figure, I'm actually going to work on the shadows first, working towards a darker blue, and throughout the whole figure, simply because it's actually easier to do the shadows first rather than needing to go back and forward. So by starting with that and then just adding the layer of color, I can then go back, blend in, and resaturate. Grass and trees all approached in a similar way, working in some shadows with more bluey greens, but making sure that we have that really sharp highlight from the light source of the moon behind our characters. What about the sky, I hear you asking? Well, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the sky. It's actually the reason I'm cutting out the piece, because I trace around the silhouette of our full image here. By doing it on a completely separate piece of blank blending card, it will ensure that I can create more depth between the last layers of the background and the sky without the silhouette cut out of them being sort of stuck on that distant horizon. Now, building up such an intense contrasting gradient from like near black blue to like white, light yellow is really hard, especially because when you go from yellow to blue, you sort of get green in the middle. So to do this, I actually start only really touching the blue and creating the gradient from deep blues to lighter blues towards the sun. Once I've got those gradients to a place that I'm pretty happy with and that are quite smooth, leaving the areas where the clouds will be untouched for now, then I can go into where the moon is and add a couple of layers of the yellow without over blending it so that we don't end up too green in the middle. Now I have all of the pieces of my potentially 3D art. I just need to 3D them. This is tricky because there's lots of fiddly little bits, especially in the pieces of the trees in the background. So my first step is actually to sort of group each layer of the image together so I don't have floating pieces, and to also ensure that everything aligns nicely. I'm basically just cutting off black card with bleed room, which is going to stick to the underside of that layer, both to add stability, but also, especially in the layers like the trees, keep all of those little floating pieces together in one piece that aligns with all of the other layers. And once I've done that, it really is quite simply a matter of cutting out foam core that isn't going to be visible from behind those layers to give each of them a centimeter or two's distance between each layer and the layer before the other until our final 3D piece is constructed. It just jumps out. I am so happy with this. It's amazing. Even the layers where like there isn't artwork behind it, from the person to the monster to the trees, it just sort of looks like shadow because of the black paper underneath. Love the result, and I just want to see how far I can take this. But before I do, I'm going to share the fun. I have a couple of friends who joined me for the launch video, Alicia and Murray. They blew my mind with how great their pieces were and how quickly they picked it up. And it has me wondering how much cooler could their art be if they didn't have a time limit, they had all 48 markers, and it was 3D. So let's start off with Murray. And considering how much Murray loves dragons, I've asked him to do the same piece he already did so well, but without a limit.
You know, I actually have zero issues with this, zero qualms. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna color in the dragon and like the foreground and the mountains, but leave the background out. So we're gonna cut all around here, and I'm gonna take a separate piece of paper and make a new background, which will be fun, because I'm thinking now that I suck at drawing clouds. So I'll see how that goes. So deciding to paint a classic red dragon, I really want to sell the scale of this dragon. I want it to be massive. So what I'm gonna do is hopefully something a little bit clever. I'm actually gonna use a lot of blues and purples to shade this, and then use all the bright oranges and skin tones to highlight it. In my mind, this is gonna be basically the same trick when you look into the distance and see mountains. They look sort of blue and hazy. That's what I'm gonna use to try and shade the underside of this dragon. And so I'm gonna continue switching between colors and making sure that I leave a little bit of an edge around all these sculpted muscles and wing masses. This is where the lightest highlights are gonna go, and I'm gonna do those last. Once the color's down and it's not perfect in your eyes, it's not the end of the world. You can always grab just another color and sort of muddle it around and sort of shift the values a bit. I came up with this idea. I'd start with gray and purple neutral colors on the underbelly here, and then glaze over the top with a yellow. I'm really happy with that, and I'm gonna try and do the exact same thing with the skin membranes to make it look like the sun is really shining through with a really thin membrane. Alright, I'm happy to say that I have finished this dragon and I love it. So I have to start thinking about the mountains. I want to keep the focus on the dragon, and this is just some nice garnish in the background. To finish things up, I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna grab this almost turquoise color, and I'm gonna attempt to create a sort of a mist effect in the valleys here, which will add just a bit of separation and create even more depth. Now there's one more part left here for the foreground, and that is the literal foreground. It's this sort of knockoff Pride Rock that this human has decided to stand on. And so I'm going to try and color that in a bit brighter than the rest, but sort of making it match the rest of the ground. The human here is completely insignificant and therefore shall be painted as such, which effectively translates to I'm gonna basically turn it into a silhouette. Now I just need to paint a skybox. Yes, the sky with clouds. I'm going to see what I can do, and we're going to experiment. However, skies can be as ridiculous as you want them, and I really want to push that concept, and I want this to feel like the sky is opening up behind the dragon, creating this ridiculous effect of scale, distance, and depth. I personally find that if you allow yourself the safety net of being able to edit or erase things, then you really find yourself falling back on that. And if you have something that cannot be erased, then you really have to enter this mindset of just going with the flow and accepting that wherever the pen might go, that is now canon. It is permanent and it exists. Every mark and gesture is going to be an interesting part of this artwork. And so there we go, I've done it. I've just started scribbling. It's happening. Then finally, once I'm actually kind of happy with these clouds, if I take the main artwork and place it back on top, yeah, hell yeah. All right, I'm really happy with this.
And look at this incredible result. As you can see, with unlimited time and adding that fancy 3D effect into the mix, Murray's dragon really pops. Now, both Murray's and my 3D pieces were created just from the one image that we 3Dified. I want to see what Alicia can do by mixing two, and then we won't have as much of that challenge of trying to mitigate lost layers from illustration that doesn't exist behind subjects, if that makes sense. And like Murray, Alicia has had limited hands-on experience with alcohol markers, but is an exceptionally talented artist. So I'm excited to see how she can make this piece pop.
For my challenge today, I have decided to pick this vampire-y, Dracula, spooky guy, but he doesn't come with a background, and doing it by himself will be too easy. So I am going to pick another page of the coloring book to use as a background and put them together. So I decided to tackle the scariest thing first, which is the sky. My vision was that it would basically be a huge gradient in the background. I knew I wanted it to be like super dark and gloomy, but I also wanted it to have this like blue overtone, so it had that spooky, scary look as well. I pictured this giant moon in the background as well. So I kind of had to work out how I could do the gradient without interrupting the space of the moon. So I had the clever idea to use the lens of a camera to sort of block out the space, so then I could gradient around it and it would keep this perfect circle for the moon. I deliberately decided to do all of the blue of the sky first and then add the yellow glow of the moon later. This is because I actually didn't want the yellow to blend with the blue, otherwise it would turn out kind of green. So I decided to do the blue, let it dry, and then add a soft yellow. And once I started adding the splotchy, sort of cratery texture of the moon, it was really coming together. For the midground, I kind of just jumped straight in and hoped for the best. So I started with my lightest value and my darkest value, which would have been the background and the foreground. And this helped me set a limit on what my values would be. I used heaps of gradients in this too. I'd finally built up my confidence, so I decided to put gradients basically everywhere, and that gave it this kind of foggy effect, as if there was like a tool fog or something at the base of the mountains and the trees. At this point, I realized I was probably being a little bit overly cautious in terms of my color selection. I did want everything to have that blue ambient light, but I didn't want everything to just look blue, so I decided to get a little bit more experimental in the house, adding red roofs and wooden details. At this point, the red was looking a little bit out of place and I was getting worried, but I knew I wanted to add some red to my foreground character, and I was hoping that it would tie it all in. You might notice that I'm actually colouring in over the foreground trees because I wanted to cut them out separately. I pretty much used the same colours for the foreground trees, but made everything a little bit darker, and that would really push the foreground trees into the foreground. And of course I couldn't forget the little owl. As for the main character, this Dracula vampire guy, I decided to start with the lightest tones because I was probably the most scared to do them. This included a white shirt and very pale skin. At this point on its own, the skin was looking very green, but I was kind of leaning into that like sickly vampire sort of vibe. And once I started adding everything else, it really started coming together. It really made the skin seem a lot lighter than it was previously. For the gold scepter, I tried to be really rough with my blending. I didn't blend too much, just to make it look more reflective. Last but not least, I finished everything off with a couple of white highlights, and this really helped the reflective things pop, like the blood spill on his lip, the gold scepter. Even the neck scarf now looks a little bit silken.
I think it's pretty clear to see this whole 3D theory that is like way more simple and approachable is working really well. I want to take it to the next level. How do you do that? You make it bigger and better. To make it better, I'm going to pick some really cool pieces I think will go together. Starting off with this group of 4 legendary heroes, and I'm going to put that on top of this amazing fantasy landscape, which is begging for awesome color mixes there. In terms of bigger, these are A4. But there is a digital option as a backing for the Color Quest on Kickstarter, and every tier above the digital option gets the digital option. So if you get a book, or both books, or the whole set, including the markers, you will also get all of the pieces high resolution digital copies, plus an extra free digital image for every landmark we hit over that initial funding goal. But anyways, I took the digital copies of those items to our local print shop and got them printed on A3 blending card, and multiple times so that I can overcome some of the challenges of those multi-layer issues, especially where the characters overlap slightly, and make it basically a non-issue. Hopefully. Let's find out. Starting off with our adventurers. The landscape they are going to be on is sunlit by a rising sun from behind. They will have a different environment, of course, so I'm keeping that in mind when leaving that rim light coloring space as I start off with this heroine holding up her sword. Now she is at the front of the piece. There is no overlap of anything in front of her. The rogue, however, which I'm coloring on the same sheet, is overlaid, as you can see, by this wizard and his staff. Now, I'm ignoring that. As you can see, I've just drawn the lines of what his actual outline is behind that, and I'm coloring him as if the wizard doesn't exist. We'll get to how that will affect the piece later, but I really don't think it'll be an issue at all. Now, his feature color is obviously more red. I also want to make sure he looks nicely deceptive and devilishly cunning, with his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. Now I move on to another print of the same heroes, but this time coloring in the other 2, for the simple reason of being able to mitigate the overlay. So as you can see with our wizard on the right, whose feature color is purple, I just push his silhouette out over the edge where he's overlapped by the shield, and again color it in as if that doesn't exist. And then to our wizard, who will even it all out with our final feature color of green, extending his silhouette behind what is otherwise our female heroine's leg laid in front of it, but ignoring it completely as we color him in. We're going to come back to the heroes, but it's time to move on to our background. And this is going to be a little more layered, and believe it or not, a little more challenging. The heroes were pretty straightforward, but I kind of have to do the environment in separate multiple pages. And because it's A3, some of the larger areas are going to be a little more time consuming to blend. So I'm starting off not with the sky, but with the mountains and the distant earthy horizon, and focusing on the scheme of colors that I want to bring about, which is a golden sunrise with lavender purple hues and the shadows and just in the environment as a whole. With the plan being for when I get around to doing the sky, making that a beautiful mix of golds and purples. The other thing I'm doing that's a bit different with this approach is I'm actually whiting out the line which is at the dividing edge of where the next layer will be in front of it. This doesn't have to look perfect, and if I planned ahead, I could have actually sort of just done this digitally and made it easier on myself, but it actually doesn't matter all that much. All I want to do is soften the intensity of that line repetition between layers of the 3D layers that are going to be in front. So, you know, it's not a perfect cover up, especially because the alcohol marker goes down slightly differently over the white paint than it does on the white paper. But with that said, it still gives me the ability to just go that little bit further with my coloring over those edges to make sure that there's more room for 3D visual overlay and potentially even more distance between the eventual layers by enabling me to push further out from where the current edge or boundary is. Doing the same for the next most immediate layer, which is all of the very near foreground things, those thicker lines around the barrels and the bushes. And again, it's not a perfect whiteout, but it's just enough that with my gradiented coloring coming towards these vibrant green farmlands, I can go further over the edges and create a better 3D effect later. My last foreground layer is those bushes and barrels, and they're going to be colored in a little bit darker to give that sense of focus, pulling our eye towards the brighter, more vibrant areas in the piece in the center. And now the layer that's going to tie it all together, the sky at the back. I actually use a light box on a blank piece of A3 card over a layer that I can use to trace the silhouettes of the distant mountains. And then I use that outline with extra bleed as the foundation for the sky that I'll be creating. I really want to try and capture a transcendent, mystical feeling, going from gold and gradienting through pink all the way towards purple at the very outer edges. Because there's so much area to cover, it's just a matter of going back and forth in multiple layers until after about 5 or 6 layers, it's all blended together really nicely and has a lot of saturation in it. And then I can move on to adding some 3D-ness to the clouds and blending those again in with the sky and coloring them in to capture the light and those lavender shadows cast through the sky. With everything fully colored in, it's finally time to see how it all comes together. With all the heroes cut out, we come right back around to those areas, as you can still see, that have been overlaid by the layers in front. Now, they're not too bad, especially with it colored in as it is, but I'm actually going to bring slightly more attention to it by actually shading them in with a dark gray and then resaturating with their original color, which will simply just make it look like an intentionally painted cast shadow from the person in front of them. So what might otherwise have been a frustration or a distraction actually will hopefully end up adding to this depth effect, making them look intentionally layered with one another. Last but not least, it's just a matter of putting it all together. And because I've done all of that groundwork in making sure that I have as much overlap freedom with each of the layers as possible, my hope is I can make this even deeper and even more 3-dimensional. And with how happy I am with the coloring in all of these characters and in the layers of the environment and how it's all coming together, I can't help but feel that this final piece will really show how this really simple trick can genuinely bring a piece of art to life. At the start of this video, I had never done this before and hoped it would look cool. And by the end, I am certain it worked. I am so happy with this. They're really fun, and also, like, I just love how simple it is to pull off. 2 of these were done just with the 1 image and we just made our own sky, and these ones were obviously with layers of different pieces that went together, and the result is just so satisfying and vibrant. I have really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. If you want to give it a go yourself, go check out the Color Quest while it's on Kickstarter. It's going to be over in almost a week and you won't be able to get these amazing illustrations again. This stuff, the bomb. That is it for now, and until next time, we'll see you in the adventure.